How's it going, everybody? RazingHel here. Now, on March 17th, 2017, Firefly posted a new news update in the Stronghold Kingdoms client, which focused on their plans going forward for the mobile launch of the game, as well as a new upcoming world called EU4. I was just going to do a brief rundown on what we learned from this news article and some of the potential implications it might have going forward. So to get started, on March 23rd, 2017, EU4 will launch with a new set of rules, and those rules are as follows. The age system is getting scrapped in favor of a new system called eras. Now, we don't have a lot of information from Firefly on eras at the moment, but the general premise and sort of overall overarching promise is that they're going to be killing the unpopular changes that they've made in ages past, as well as keeping the positive ones, such as army speed increases. Now, like I said before, not a whole lot of information has actually been pinned down. Firefly has not said much on the topic, but there were a couple of things that they did mention. One of them was the fact you won't get kicked out of your faction or house as the eras change from one to another. Another is the fact that Parish and other capital buildings will not be deleted as the world transitions from one era to another. By and large, these eras sound very similar to ages with just a few minor changes, and I think, this is just speculation, but I think the only reason for calling them eras is to help players distinguish between like age 1, age 2, and era 1, era 2, and their different rule sets. Another change is being made to the religion research branch in the technology tree. Now the monking abilities will start unlocking at level 10 instead of level 8, and that will start with interdiction. Currently, I have not seen any updated tree, so I don't know in what order these monking abilities will unlock, but we so far have nailed down interdiction as the starting point at level 10 and excommunication at level 20, I believe. Now, when it comes to interdiction, this has been another thing that's changed in terms of research for it. You'll no longer be able to research higher than your rank. So in other words, if you want to interdict a player that's level 15, you will have to be at least level 15 and complete the relevant research to do that. By and large, the objective here was to make sure that fewer players can use alt accounts to boost their main using these lower ranked players sending interdiction to them. Also, there is going to be a faith point cap that scales by rank. So in other words, starting out at the base level, you will have a total cap of 750. That means you cannot gain more than 750 faith points in a world, and it scales all the way up to 200,000 at the highest rank. Now, I would personally suggest that this should also scale based on the number of villages that a player controls, because this will reward players who invest in villages and also sort of discourages alts from farming up faith points with a relatively small number of villages. And also, since you're limited in the number of faith points you can store, it would make sense that players who have more villages are given consideration with a higher cap, because they're going to need those faith points to interdict their villages for longer. That's just my opinion, though, and by and large, I wish Firefly would de-emphasize the importance of villages in favor of another system, which I have called outposts, but that is sort of a topic for another time. Another change that has been made is players must be ranked 8 instead of 4 to vote in Parish Elections. In my opinion, this is a pretty minor change, and overall, I don't see it having a whole lot of impact, as actually leveling up accounts is not a big deal, especially when we're going from level 4 to level 8. I just don't see that reducing like alt account meddling in Parish Elections by a huge amount. But then again, I don't have the statistics and numbers in front of me that I imagine Firefly does, so maybe they know something that I don't. Another change that is going to be made is players below rank 8 can only be captured and not raised. Now, I personally don't think this is going to have the intended results that Firefly hopes it will, but I could be wrong. In my opinion, all this does, it makes it very easy for enemies to spawn down an alt into an area and then send attacks at that alt, capture that alt, and the opposition has to spend a disproportionate amount of honor to get rid of them. And that'll be covered in the next change, which is the increased cost for raising low-ranked players. Now, about this, we don't know the specific numbers, but I have to wonder why not capturing as well, because as I pointed out before, what this will largely do is give a huge advantage to players invading other parishes. If you have a very cheap cost to capture, it makes it completely feasible that you can spawn down an account in a parish and then send an attack to it, and it's going to be cheaper than it would be to raise it. So then you pretty much get into that county free of charge. You have attacked that player. That player is under rank 8, so it was not possible for the defender to actually counter raise that attack, so they'd either have to counter attack it, and then that player is always holding on to one extra village, or they always have one blank slot in their village roster, so that way they can actually take that village via a capture capture, and then another faction member or house member has to actually go ahead and raise the player who just captured the player who captured the alt that they spawned into that. And it just, in general, I do not see the real clear advantage to doing it this way, aside from the fact that I think Firefly is actually going for a kinder, more hospitable world. In the past, we know that a lot of lower ranked players were often suspected of being alt and were usually indiscriminately raised. And a lot of what these changes do, I think, is make it a lot more difficult to actually remove villages from the map. Lastly, we have the fact that raises are only available to players ranked Prince and above, and this has to date proven to be the most controversial change of all. And it sort of plays into the idea that I have that largely what this update focuses on is actually making future worlds more hospitable towards the mobile demographic, who is not perhaps quite as hardcore as the PC gaming audience. So what is the problem with raising at Prince rank or above? Well, there are a lot of good arguments put forward against it in the forum, and by and large, they get into it a little bit too far for me to actually cover them all succinctly. So I encourage you to read more there. But from what I understand is that the reason Firefly made this change was a couple of reasons. Either they thought that this would reduce the number of players using alt accounts to perform cheap raises, or else they were hoping that this would help reduce the number of villages raised per world, which I think is overall a net positive, because in general, it takes a long time to build villages without cards. Even if you have fully maxed out research on for building castles and building villages, it's still going to take you 2 to 3 weeks easily, even if you were sitting at your computer full time, because castle buildings, it depends upon the type of buildings you use, but it takes quite a while. And the fact that they can be just erased from the world so easily, I think actually turned a lot of players off. So if we can get a world where it is more possible to simply exchange villages rather than raising them all the time, I think the losses from like losing a village in such a scenario would be much less crushing and much less discouraging than when somebody actually raises you. Now, the downsides to this is it actually favors players who probably invest more money in the game without any counterbalancing, because by and large, faith points have been one of the last remaining great equalizers in terms of free-to-play versus pay-to-win players. And now that they're being capped, that means that free-to-play players can no longer leverage that to their advantage anymore. And the fact that now you have to wait until you're ranked Prince or above to raise actually means that it might take longer for free-to-play players to actually find a role and a way to help their faction or house while they're still leveling up, which means it could take longer for them to get into the game in any sort of meaningful way and maintain their interest in it, because otherwise, up until that point, they're pretty much just going to be capturing wolf castles and doing quests and stuff like that, and not any of the actual engaging stuff of the game. The quests and the PvE elements are by no means as compelling as the player versus player mechanics for especially that core demographic that by and large Firefly is targeting with the game. Overall, I have been a little bit disappointed by this update, considering the fact that it took this long to get it out. I had hoped to see much more substantial changes than we actually did. Now, it should be noted that all of these rules that I mentioned previously are actually going to only apply to worlds being released from this point onwards. So all previous worlds that have been released will maintain their current rule sets. The new update is simply and only for new worlds. So I know that was a little bit lengthy. Probably you could have read the original post in as much time, but I hope I provided some insight and actually got my perspective out there, because I don't think there were many players that are like me in terms of being sort of a veteran of the game while at the same time never investing much money into it. So as a free-to-play veteran player of the game, so to speak, up until the time when I quit, I think my perspective is largely unique, and I think that makes it just valuable to get it out there. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you next time.